Waiting game is finally over. We get the Sweet 16. We got Michigan in action today, Purdue in action tomorrow. Can't wait.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't wait for this Michigan game. I think they have a great matchup against Villanova. I really like the way Michigan is playing, especially against Villanova's pack line defense.
We are going to get Trey's thoughts as we break that down. That matchup for tonight is our big story, and the Wolverines certainly are playing well coming in. They snuck into the tourney as an 11 seed after an up-and-down regular season, but looked really good through these first two games, befitting of their number 6 preseason ranking. In Villanova, they get a veteran group, which has won 2 of the last 5 national championships. The Wildcats are the 2 seed in the South. They, of course, took down Ohio State this weekend. Let's start when Michigan's on the defensive end, Trey. And I think anyone who's watched Villanova this year, and really in recent years, because this has been a consistent theme, the biggest challenge with Villanova has been dealing with their guards.
Yep.
So give us a sense of what they're up against here in terms of guard play for the Wildcats.
Yeah, they run all their stuff primarily through Colin Gillespie and Justin Moore. Those guys manufacture about 70% of their offensive production through points and assists. And a lot of it is Colin Gillespie. They like to just play post-ups. You know, for Big Ten fans, it's similar to Paul Mulcahy when he was hot in the middle of the year, where they would just give him the ball in post-up situations and let him create and make plays. And the same thing for Justin Moore. He's a big guard as well. He can post up. He can play out of ball screen situations. So they're going to have to be prepared for that. And Michigan doesn't have a lot of size at the point guard position to guard Colin Gillespie. Colin Gillespie has some success against Ohio State's guards, so that's going to be something to watch for.
It's interesting because this is an undersized Villanova team, certainly on the front line, and
Right.
we can talk about that in a minute. But this is one of the areas where they make up for it, right? I mean, Moore is a really good rebounder. He's led them in rebounding 8 different times. As you say, Gillespie, a guy who can post up. So we'll get into the size in the front court and maybe how that might benefit Michigan. But this is an area where perhaps Villanova can flip the script, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they could definitely flip the script. I think, you know, when you think about big guards, right, they're not going to beat you with speed, right? They're going to beat you with just their physicality and wearing you down. So I think that's where Michigan's depth comes into play at the guard position. You know, Frankie Collins is going to have to be a pest and try to make them feel a little bit uncomfortable. Devontae Jones, they're going to have to get different contributions on the defensive end. But I think one area to watch for is pick-and-roll defense. Michigan's pick-and-roll defense has been one of the worst pick-and-roll defenses all year long. And a lot of that has to do with Hunter Dickinson because they use him so much on the offensive end and because he plays such heavy minutes. It's hard for him to get out and guard on those pick and rolls. And Villanova is one of the best pick and roll offenses. They run a lot of random movements. We heard Hunter Dickinson talk about that, kind of similar to Iowa, where it's a lot of emotion stuff. But at the end, they're getting back to that ball screen action. So he's going to have to be prepared to guard some of those actions.
So what about this? One thing that we saw Michigan do with some success against Tennessee in particular was sprinkle in some zone.
Yep.
As a way to protect Hunter Dickinson on the defensive end. Is that something that they could do here against Villanova? The flip side, of course, is if a team's a really good outside shooting team, they can burn you when you're in a zone. But Tennessee wasn't able to knock down the threes. There was only a few possessions in that game. But is that perhaps a strategy here that they may use more against Villanova?
Yeah, I think it's a great strategy because Villanova is not a great shooting team. I think they shoot around 33, 34% from 3 on the year. And Michigan's zone has been really successful this year. There's been times where they've struggled defensively, as I mentioned, Hunter Dickinson having to guard a lot. They get in that zone. Hunter Dickinson's able to get a little bit of a rest. They're long, they're athletic, kind of similar to the old Syracuse teams where they had the athletes to kind of make up for some of those spots. I think that's going to be successful because, you know, this Villanova team, they don't have a lot of guys on the perimeter, especially that can really shoot the ball at the high clip.
What about the flip side? What about when Michigan is on the offensive end? This is a Villanova team. I think through the years, when you think about Villanova, and they're really great teams under Jay Wright, it's been more about the offense.
Right.
They're usually a top 10 offense in terms of efficiency, but they're certainly very solid on the defensive end. It never feels like defense is a liability for them. It's just not relatively as strong as their offense. So what about when Michigan's on the offensive end trying to attack Villanova?
You have to run. I think that's the biggest thing. You have to get out and run. Villanova likes to play in the half court, and their half court defense is so sound. They could switch 1 through 4. So I think you can get out and run. If you look back at that Ohio State game, they were struggling the whole game. But when Ohio State was able to get out and run, put the ball in Malachi Branham's hands, they had a lot of success. And one of the things they did, they just ran a lot of drag screens, double drag, simple actions. You don't want to run too many complicated actions because Villanova is a very cerebral defensive team. So I think if they could just run some simple actions, get some quick seal-ins, high ball screens for Devontae Jones, they'll be successful.
What about when they are kind of stuck in playing a half-court game? In other words, you try to run, they slow you down,
Sure.
and they're able to settle in. How do you attack them? You've mentioned their pack line team,
Right.
that they're really sound in that half-court. What's the strategy at that point?
Well, yeah, Villanova plays a pack line defense, and what that means is there's always guys in the paint helping, no matter what. And I think that could really play into Michigan's benefit because they have a lot of guys that are shooting the ball at a high clip. Obviously, Caleb Houston didn't have a great game, but he's a guy that I think can have a big game in this game because they're always helping. And, you know, one of the funny things is when you're playing that pack line defense, you kind of get in the habit no matter who you're guarding, and you kind of lose your sense of just natural, just basketball instincts in terms of knowing where shooters are. I think Villanova sometimes, I was watching film, no matter what and no matter who they're guarding, they're always going to sit in that pack line defense. So I think it just can be a simple drive and kick game. You don't want to penetrate too deep because they're going to really help and dig at your ball and maybe cause some turnovers. So I think it's a one dribble attack, kick out, and I think guys can knock down shots and have a lot of success.
One other area where, in watching Villanova, it's apparent they're not overly strong is depth.
Yeah.
Right? This is a team that essentially plays like 7 guys. And I think one thing that's really encouraged me about Michigan here recently is that the bench has started to produce
Right.
more. You know, Terrence Williams has kind of stood out here where he's
Yeah.
come in and given them a few big moments. Frankie Collins was great. I mean, they're not here without Frankie Collins' performance in the Colorado State game. I realize technically he was the starter in that game, but he is a bench player if Devontae Jones is healthy, and Devontae Jones has seemed to indicate that he is. Is that an area that you believe Michigan can exploit?
Yeah, and I think because of that, they have to get out and run. Try to make them tired. I think they, like you just said, they had a lot of success getting out, utilizing their depth. Frankie Collins pushing the pace, getting to those high ball screen situations, making Villanova guard in the early. You don't want to make this a half-court game. You don't want to muck it up. You don't want this to be where you're, using a ton of shot clock. You want to get out and run and really, really try to get this Villanova defense tired.
It's funny because you look at this game, and with Michigan as the 11 seed, there is kind of this notion that they're this huge underdog and they're a surprise, and I think they are a surprise relative to where they were a month ago, where we were even a few weeks ago sitting here debating whether or not they were going to make the tournament. But you think about this game in the preseason, Trey, I mean, Villanova was the number 4 ranked team in the country. Michigan was number 6. I mean, you wouldn't have thought this was a Sweet 16 game. You would have thought this was an Elite 8 game, and I think that is where Michigan is different to me than a typical 11 seed. They're an 11 seed with McDonald's All-Americans. They're an 11 seed with All-Americans, period, when you talk about Hunter Dickinson, college All-Americans. So I do think, and I don't know if you would agree, but, I mean, talent-wise, I think they stack up very favorably.
Yeah, and here's the thing, too, is Villanova, they don't beat themselves. Like, you have to beat them with talent. And Michigan has the talent. I mean, they were preseason top 10 for a reason because they have guys that can put the ball in the basket. And I think that's where Ohio State struggled, is because they're kind of similar to Villanova where, they play cerebral basketball. It's tougher for them to get offensive production and put the ball in the basket and have multiple guys put the ball in the basket. That's where Michigan is different. They have Terrence Williams who can knock down 3 threes. They have Frankie Collins that can give you 12 to 14 points off the bench. Devontae Jones, who's probably been one of the top 3 point guards in the later half of the Big Ten season. They have so many weapons. And I think another thing, too, is Hunter Dickinson's ability to shoot and extend the defense is going to be important in this game as well. I think that's really changed everything for this Michigan offense, and having Moussa Diabate inside being kind of one of those guys who can just seal, get easy baskets. So I think there's just so much balance and versatility to Michigan's offense.
To me, Hunter Dickinson is the single most interesting player in this game because you talk about he can be a bit of a liability on the defensive end just because of the ball screen action that you were talking about. But Villanova's undersized, and he presents so many problems because he pulls guys outside. He's incredible on the low post. I mean, he is so skilled. We were talking yesterday about what a fabulous passer he is. He does so many things well man, he's hard to prepare for a defense.
Yeah, and I would expect Villanova to switch a lot of things. And then because of that, I would expect them to switch and then probably send double teams. And I think that's where Hunter Dickinson's passing ability is going to be huge in this game. And then guys being able to knock down shots. You think about, you get a switch, you get the ball into Hunter Dickinson. That's where Caleb Houston is going to be big. I think between Caleb Houston, Eli Brooks, Terrence Williams, you're going to need about 6 or 7 threes between those 3 guys. And I think if they get that, they'll win the game.
Cannot wait. Should be a fun one to watch. More on Big Ten today. We mentioned this last week, a historic hire for Michigan football. Milan Bolden-Morris, hired as a graduate assistant working with the quarterbacks, becomes the first female GA ever in the Big Ten, first in the Power 5 since the 1980s when Bill Curry had a young woman working with his kickers at Georgia Tech. Bolden-Morris will start her new job after she finishes up a grad program at Georgetown, where she was the Hoyas' leading scorer on the basketball court this year. And as you can see, she is still representing Georgetown as she joins us now. Milan Bolden-Morris joining us from D.C. Mimi, first of all, congratulations. What a great story this is. Where did your interest in coaching football come from?
Well, growing up, my dad coached my brother like every year until high school. And I was always my dad's water girl. So I went with him everywhere, attached to the hip. And that was really what sparked it. And I wanted to play so badly, but my mom's artsy. So she was the cheerleader, the dancer, and that's what she wanted me to be. So she never allowed me to play. But I was able to play flag because there's a flag football league in my town. So I played that until I was in high school. And so I was just constantly consumed in it. And where my brother and I are from, football is literally religion. It's all there is. It's a small little farm town with cornfields and sugarcane fields everywhere. So football is really all we grew up around, and it just kind of came full circle that I had this opportunity, honestly.
Right. So as I mentioned, you'll be the first female grad assistant ever in the Big Ten. Were you aware when you applied of kind of the historic nature of it, or was it simply, hey, I'm interested in football, I've always wanted to be around it, and here's an opportunity?
Yeah, I had no idea. I knew there was very few women in football in general on all levels, but I didn't know that the Big Ten had never had a woman. So when I found out, like, the news was going crazy, and I really didn't know. So I had all these people telling me like what was going on. So I thought that was really cool.
It was interesting in seeing Coach Harbaugh's comments. I want to get this quote right. He said he was impressed with your ideas for coaching and for making us a better team. That's the direct quote. So what were the ideas that you shared with Coach Harbaugh?
Well, I just think I bring a perspective that's different than usual. I mean, me being a basketball player and being a guard, a lot of my kind of philosophies and the way that I approach the game are unorthodox in a way, because I'm kind of translating football into basketball in my head. And so I'm just really creative, and Coach Harbaugh is really open to learning in different ways. And I think that's why he's created this winning culture, because he's so open-minded in his approach. I mean, he's looking for new ways to win, looking for new ways to create a space for the guys that makes them want to stay and retain his athletes. So honestly, the new ideas are really just my way of interpreting football and in my perspective. And then he just kind of like, I don't know, we put our heads together and it became what it is now. So
it's interesting, your background, not just as a guard in basketball and a point guard, right, who the offense kind of revolves around, but I noticed you're also a catcher in softball, and I always think of that as kind of the position where you kind of have to know everything that's going on as well. And there is the similarity to quarterbacks, and you'll be working with the quarterbacks. How much does all of that experience, even though it is in different sports, how much do you think you can bring that to the football field?
I think it's tremendous. I'm so blessed that I played so many sports growing up, because my IQ and everything that I played was always so high. Playing catcher, I mean, I had to call pitches some games. I had to know like situational stuff. And then in basketball, the same thing happened. I didn't know time and score, how many timeouts, the possession. And now football, having to read defenses and know like the coverages and stuff like that, different formations that will help us get an advantage. So I think that everything that I've done so far in sports has played a role in the way that I understand it. And it just gives a different perspective. And it's really helped the way that I conceptualize things. And I'm able to translate all of that to different athletes too, because we all learn differently. So I think that's really cool. And it's a huge asset to everything I've done in my life.
People are obviously going to make a big deal out of the gender component of this. Heather Marini is the quarterback's coach at Brown, and there's been a lot of publicity around her. To what extent are you familiar with her career, familiar with her? Like, have you had any kind of interaction in terms of, hey, what's the challenge here of being a female on a college staff?
I actually haven't talked to her, but I've talked to Coach Jennifer King with the Commanders. I've talked to Sophia Lewin, who's now with the Bills. I think she was with Dartmouth. No, she was with Princeton before. So I've talked to a couple coaches and Coach Lowe with the Bucks. So I've talked to them about just their challenges and picking their brain. But all in all, they really just speak to me about like persevering and how, I'm going to have to work harder than men, and that's almost inevitable. But just being able to understand what I'm getting myself into, and they've taught me just how the game goes. And that's been the coolest part about this whole experience, is that you have this community of women that we want each other to do well, and they've taken me under their wing and have helped me thus far, and I'm so grateful for it.
One other component of this that is unusual, and you were mentioning your brother Mike earlier, and I think most Big Ten fans probably know, he is a defensive end on the Michigan football team. So not only are you going to be in this interesting position as a coach, but you're also in some ways going to be overseeing your brother. I realize it's not his position group that you're going to oversee, but you're going to be on the staff and he is going to be a player. Have you thought at all about that dynamic?
Absolutely. I give him crap about it all the time. I have to call me coach. But yeah, I'm really excited. I told him as long as he doesn't touch my quarterbacks, we're fine. Like, we won't have a problem. But yeah, I'm really excited. And I've watched my brother play, so I think seeing him this close up, watching him develop, will be the coolest part of it all. I'm just grateful that I'm going to be a part of it. But yeah, I do give him crap about how he actually has to listen to me now. So.
Mimi, in researching your background a little bit, I noted this is not your first time in the national spotlight. Tell people who may not know the story a little bit about your prom dress.
Yeah. So in, what was it, 2017? That's the year. Yeah, it's the year I graduated. I had a prom dress that kind of portrayed all the men and women who passed away from or were killed from police brutality. And that was something that probably one of the most honored things I was able to do in my life, because just to represent them was an experience and a blessing in itself. I was able to meet Trayvon Martin's mom, and he was the biggest picture on my dress. And just hearing her story and hearing her advocacy and the things that she does, I was actually able to go to one of her events just to fundraise and things like that for families who have been affected by police brutality. And so that was really the first thing that when I Google myself and all my friends Google me, that's the first thing they see, and they ask me the same thing.
Well, so let me ask you this. I mean, I know that you're in your career, right? You're in your life. This is the first step in your career, and who knows where it will go. But what can this mean more broadly? And I know, like, people don't see themselves as like, hey, I'm going to be a trailblazer, I'm going to be a symbol for change or whatever. You're just doing your thing, right? And this is what interests you, and this is what you want to do. However, kind of the broader message here for women, for people of color, like that you can be a vehicle to convey. Have you thought at all about that? Can you articulate a little bit what that might mean?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, I didn't know the extent of which like this position would bring, and I didn't know like who came before me, but I know that not a lot of women are in this, and not a lot of women of color. And so this position would give me opportunity to build, to grow, to assist others. And I'm a huge woman of faith and very spiritual. So I think that my purpose is greater than me, and I know that God puts us in positions to be able to bless others. And I'm so grateful that I'm in this position. Coach Harbaugh gave me this opportunity to learn and grow from him, being one of the best programs in the country, and then being able to assist and teach other women. And I know that what I do and how well I perform is only going to allow those doors to be open. And so I'm so excited and so grateful that I'm the one who could be making this happen for other women, and especially women of color. And in light of everything going on, I think it just makes it that much greater for me. So I'm really embracing the pressure that comes with it. And it's exciting to me to know that I'm the first, but I can open the door for hundreds of women to come down the road and open up a space to where they can learn from me, which I'm so excited and grateful for.
Well said. I want to leave you with this. You are, as we were talking about in the break before you came on, you're going to be a woman with several college and graduate degrees. So you're going to be incredibly well educated. Obviously, being a GA, part of that is you enroll in a graduate program. As people are probably aware, you're embarking on this coaching path, and we'll see where it takes you. But where do you see yourself in 10 years, in 20 years? What's the ultimate goal?
I would say ultimately I'd want to be a head coach one day. And then I would say 20 years, potentially GM and being able to manage everything. But I really want to make an impact on the athletes. My college career has been so up and down. I've been the best player on teams, and I've been the player that never played. So my experience has been crazy, and I just really want to make an impact on the players and help them to be the best overall individual that they can be, develop their mind, body, spirit, whatever it may be. So honestly, just being the best coach and being first female head coach, hopefully, and then create a winning program, and especially learning from Coach Harbaugh and the staff.
So to be clear, when you say you want to be a head coach, you want to be a head football coach?
Absolutely.
All right. Fascinating. This is great. Mimi Bolden-Morris, I can't wait to see you take the first step on this journey. We'll see you in Ann Arbor this summer when you're going through preseason practice. We always make a campus visit to every school. Can't wait to see you in action working with the Wolverine quarterbacks. And congratulations. Thanks so much for your time, and best of luck finishing up at Georgetown. As promised, pleased to have Maryland basketball coach Brenda Frese back with us. Coach, appreciate you hanging with us here. I was asking you, kind of as we lost you there, about playing Stanford again, and just mentioned that, hey, you were without two of your best players and two key players when you played them, but you saw them essentially at their full strength. So how does that play into this? The fact that you essentially have a scouting report on them firsthand, having played them that way, and they don't necessarily have a similar one on you.
Yeah, it really bodes well. I mean, our kids have a lot of confidence, first and foremost, when you don't have two of your starters, lead guards that are within your team. And, for everybody else, they got to play against that style and that system that Stanford plays. So, their offense, their defense, and, you feel very comfortable. But still a very tall task, the defending national champions, but we're at full strength and we're looking forward to the matchup.
They have won 20 games in a row. I mean, they are playing really, really well. You don't need me to tell you that. What are the biggest challenges that Stanford presents as you prepare for them?
Yeah, well, their length. I mean, it's a team that can match, our size, and they're really deep. I mean, they essentially have 8 to 10 starters on that team, and they can all score the basketball. So, really for both teams, I really think it's going to come down to who can stop the other defensively. I mean, with the way both teams are scoring the basketball.
Coach, I want to take a step back. I mean, the notion that you are here in the Sweet 16, and look, this is in some respects expected out of the Maryland program. You have built an absolute powerhouse, a national championship program, and I know you enter the year thinking we're a team that can compete for a national title. But I think of everything that your team has been through this year, and we were touching on it a bit off the top, but injuries and illness for you personally, losing your father, Bill, who passed away after a battle with cancer, and someone who I know is really important to you. How were you able to keep this team together, given the personal challenges that you had? I mean, dealing with grief and with an enormous loss.
Yeah, it's been a season like no other, and like you alluded to, both personally for myself as well as this team. But, I've been taught, tough times don't last, tough people do. And, we're really fortunate, this village that we have within our team. I'm most proud that they never, lost faith. They never stopped believing. They knew who they were. And I really feel like this adversity for us has just made us that much tougher and that much stronger. So I'm really excited about this matchup with Stanford, for us to have this opportunity, really just to see full circle how far we've come.
And I mentioned, Coach, you have done this before. You've done it many times, including getting to the pinnacle and cutting down the nets as a national champ. What other particular challenges do you think of navigating this tournament that maybe through the years you have learned, given your success, kind of the formula for being that team that's there at the end, or even, for being a perennial Sweet 16 type team?
Yeah. Well, it really comes down at this point. I mean, when you're talking about being one of the last 16 teams out of, close to 350 Division I teams, and you get to an Elite Eight or a Final Four, it's really a mental stamina. It's really the teams that make the least amount of mistakes. I mean, obviously, because everyone's elite at this point. Everyone is a phenomenal team that is deserving of moving on. So it's that margin of error that you have to be just that much better, that much tighter in your execution on offense and in your defensive commitment to be able to get stops.
It was interesting. I saw the back and forth that you had on Twitter with Kim Barnes-Arico, and obviously this has been a really good tournament, not just for Maryland and Michigan, but for the entire Big Ten. I mean, you got 4 of the 16 teams remaining, and it's interesting. I think back to when Maryland joined the Big Ten, and I just thought to myself in watching, you guys were so much better, frankly, than the rest of the league. And you haven't gotten worse. The rest of the league's gotten better, right? I mean, they've narrowed the gap because now there are other elite teams. You're not the only elite team in this league anymore. What has that done in your mind, kind of for the national perception of the league? The fact that now it's not just Maryland that can be a national championship contender, but 3 other teams that people talk about as being there after, heading into the second weekend.
Yeah, it's been long overdue. I think it speaks volumes to the commitment that's been made on the campuses to by the administrators to women's basketball. We have elite level coaches, and you see, with who's all in the Sweet 16 right now, the national rankings that have been there with, the top 5 teams all season long. And, just the recruiting that's taken place, the amount of talent now that's on these rosters. It feels very similar to me the year we won the national championship in 2006. We had to go through Duke and Carolina, and we've had to do that all season long, within the Big Ten. And I think that's why every single one of us that are in the Sweet 16 is more than prepared and really confident about, being ready to take on the Sweet 16 matchup.
I want to leave you with this, Coach. I really enjoyed your Sweet 16 gritty in the locker room. It looked as if you had been honing it for a while here. We're going to take a look at it. There's some obvious talent here. I mean, there's no question about it. Are you a one-hit wonder? Like, is this your only dance move, or do you have something else? Like, do you have an Elite Eight dance you got ready, a Final Four one, a national championship one?
Well, the funny thing is I'm really fortunate with having 2 teenagers who, know what's popular, and then a young coaching staff. They literally hit that with me. I wanted to play music, and they hit me, with about a 30-second intro to the gritty right before we came in. So honestly, I'd never, seen it, practiced it, right before we came in. But I'm all about having fun and putting a smile on people's faces. So if that's what I need to do, I'll go do the gritty. I'll do whatever they want me to do, if that means we keep advancing.
Absolutely, Coach. Well, it sounds like you have a very similar house to me, by the way, because were it not for my kids, I'd have no earthly idea what was going on in the world. But thank goodness we've got them. I look forward, hopefully, to an equally joyous celebration whatever form it might take tomorrow. Appreciate you hanging with us and giving us a big chunk of your time, frankly, today. Enjoy Spokane and best of luck against the Cardinal tomorrow. And Trey, I know you wanted to talk through some other players in the Big Ten who you think have big decisions to make. And let's start with the biggest guy, maybe not in terms of the decision, but in terms of physical stature. I think the Kofi Cockburn decision is utterly fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you think about it, maybe in 2000, 1999, he's a top 5 pick for sure.
Yes.
But the game has just changed. It's evolved. 3-point shooting. You talk about Steph Curry changing the game. Playing with 5 guys that can shoot. But even with that, I think Kofi can have some value in the NBA, guarding guys like Joel Embiid for 5-10 minutes here and there, guarding guys like Nikola the Joker, guarding guys like DeAndre Ayton, who's an upcoming star in the NBA. So I think he could have value because he's a durable player. You think about Kofi, he played 30 minutes per game. So he's a guy that can give you energy off your bench if you're an NBA team.
It seems to me his calculus is simply, will I be able to stick on a roster, right? And if he thinks he will be able to, if he's advised that he will be able to, well, then you go. But otherwise, then, I mean, this is the brave new world of NIL where you can make a lot of money by staying in school, and there's certainly value that he has. And so maybe you go back to Champaign. Do you go to Europe? I mean, you make money. I mean, it's just, I think it's utterly fascinating. I think he's like one of these first test cases of the impact of NIL. And as you say, I mean, it's just such a different story than it would have been 20 years ago, but it's a different story than it would have been 2 years ago, too. And I think that's what makes Kofi so interesting. Let's get into a few other of these guys while we have time. I don't think either of us would have thought 3 months ago we'd be having a discussion about Malaki Branham, but it feels like his stock is really going up. What's the decision-making process, do you think, for him?
I think it comes down to, are you willing to maybe develop in the G League for a little bit? He's a guy that has all the talent in the world. And one of the things I love about Branham is that he has confidence. He really believes himself in the biggest moments. But Chris Holtmann alluded to the fact that sometimes the physicality can get to him a little bit. He's still a very young player. And so we saw when Ohio State relied on him heavily and put the ball in his hands, teams were able to push him out a little bit. And I think, obviously he's a very talented player. So I think the G League, being able to develop in that kind of environment, get used to playing against grown men and the physicality could really benefit him. Obviously he could still be a first-round draft pick, be a guy that's assigned to a G League team and be able to kind of develop that confidence against grown men. But, I think that's ultimately the decision I think he has to make, because I think he's maybe still a year away from being able to really contribute on an NBA team.
Interesting. And yet you do see, when you look at these mock drafts, him toward the end of the first round in a lot of these drafts. Whereas, honestly, you can look through draft boards and not see Kofi Cockburn at all.
Right.
I mean, not as a second-round pick, just period, not being drafted. So they're very different cases.
Sure.
What about Trace Jackson-Davis? He was convinced to come back by Mike Woodson. I think there was this talk of trying to expand his game a little bit. It hasn't really happened in terms of being able to shoot from further out away from the basket. I mean, he still does almost all of his damage inside 10 feet. Where do you think his decision-making process would be? Well,
he helped himself a ton in the Big Ten tournament. I think a lot of scouts saw that he has the ability to guard multiple positions, and that's huge for big men in the NBA's game. You have to be able to go out and guard a Steph Curry, guard a Damian Lillard on a switch at the end of shot clocks, and he proved that he can do that. But obviously, the offensive end, developing that outside game, be able to be a floor spacer, because in the NBA game, you can't sit in the paint. Teams on the offensive end, they're not going to give you the ball. So you have to be able to play off of other people. But I still think what he brings on the defensive end, I think teams are going to be willing to develop him on the offensive end.
Interesting. So he's a fascinating one. Hunter Dickinson, to me, it was a similar narrative, right? Because remember, he was in the draft last year and opted to come back, or he initially put his name in and then took his name out, and the narrative on him was needs to expand his game, needs to figure out a way, as we talked about, to step out and shoot. He has certainly done that this year. What about the flip side? And we've talked about his liabilities on the defensive end. Is that the challenge for him? Where do you see him fitting in now?
Well, I'll talk about the pros first. He kind of reminds me of a European big, some of the bigs that we get from Europe that come and play in the NBA, just because of how he's developed his game this year, his ability to play inside and out and have that big frame. But obviously, you mentioned the defensive end. There's been times where I've seen him be real active on the defensive end, especially in those ball screen situations. You think about the NBA game. It's all about ball screen situations. You know, teams are going to put the bigs in pick and roll. Can you switch out if necessary? And I think there's times where he can do it, and then there's times where I think, you know, obviously he's just tired because there's so much reliant on him on the offensive end. But obviously he won't have the basketball as much. You know, so I think that it might bode well for him to be able to, you know, just be a guy that can knock down shots, maybe expand to the three-point range a little bit, and then obviously, you know, give what he can on the defensive end too.